Ladies and gentlemen of the beautiful crypto space, I'm right now in the beautiful Madrid, and there's one very important thing I've got to tell you that I've been seeing like crazy in the comment section, and it's about one very specific thing. Are we gonna crash like crazy? And if it happens, what do we do? So the last couple of days, the debates about the Bitcoin ETFs, about the Ethereum ETFs have been stunning. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not these were underwhelming and what's going on. Let me add a few things first. First of all, did you know that BlackRock now has more Ethereum than the Ethereum Foundation? That's one. And second of all, while many people right now are thinking about selling because we're not pumping, we're not breaking these high points, most of the ETF providers are just accumulating. And many of the institutions, even South Korea, I believe's largest, if not one of the largest pension funds, has started accumulating. And this is a very important key. Most of the metrics are just increasing. Even at Marathon, one of the biggest miners, they're just buying right now. And I can't really comprehend people that think about giving up at this point. I personally think this is one of the worst points to give up. There are some pieces of bad news. For example, one thing I just saw was that a Solana ETF might not be coming anytime soon. I've just been reading up a little bit about that. And one of the main reasons is that the Ethereum ETF's volume has not been that crazy, and because there needs to be a crazy amount of demand before going through all the effort of a Solana ETF, which might not be warranted just quite yet. Then again, we all know it will be coming. It's just a matter of time. But it doesn't necessarily have to happen this run because there's more important things at hand. Anyway, if you're wondering, what are we gonna do if a massive crash were to happen? My personal plan is as follows. I'll be buying the dip, and then I'll be buying the dip, and then I'll be buying the dip, but I'll be probably selling some altcoins. Let me explain. Right now as it stands, right? I've told you before, I am personally inclining more towards being a momentum investor rather than value investor, meaning I wanna buy in crazy when things are already starting to pump, when they're starting to do good, because it's just easier in this part of the market. If you're trying to buy value, so you're trying to buy these undervalued assets, a little problem you're going with here is that you don't know when Bitcoin is going to go for the recovery rally. And if Bitcoin decides to go down even ever so slightly, almost any altcoin goes down with such degrees more that you basically have to kind of commit for perhaps a way longer time, which means you lose capital, or at least you lose the gains on your capital that you had, which you could have had a smaller yield on instead of a negative yield by investing in some altcoins. But the counter being that if Bitcoin does indeed go towards an all-time high and sets through, most likely almost every single altcoin we know will pop off too. That little window of time before we can see what coins have momentum, what area has momentum, that little area of time, you'll then be out of some of these juicier altcoins. That's the risk. So again, the risk on both sides, on the positive side being that you perhaps do not, that means Bitcoin's positive side, that you perhaps are not as early into some altcoins. On the Bitcoin negative side, it's that basically the price of Bitcoin goes down logically, and the altcoins go down way more, so that you, if you were going for altcoins at that point, are making a way bigger loss than having stables or having Bitcoin/Ethereum, as both of those I think are fine right now. Anyway, right now, if we were to crash, what I personally have sensed, right, is, and I've looked at this and I've shown you this the last couple of videos. If, I'm looking at it, but it's hard to show you my screen here. Let me just tell it to you. If we were to have another crash, what would the maximum percentage be? Let's say from Bitcoin's top, we were to crash at a crazy number. And by the way, if you're wondering what I'm holding up, I'm basically holding up this chart that I've shown you 1,000 different times on the channel. What I've basically noticed is that the worst case scenario from here for Bitcoin, let me just quickly calculate it out here. One of the worst cases I can comprehend is not really lower than 48,000, which is about 45% crash from the top. Let's say a real worst case scenario like the Corona crash back in 2020. That could place us perhaps, let me just quickly calculate the numbers that we saw back then. From its highest point, we saw a decrease of 70%. From its local high point, so where the crash basically started, we saw a roughly 64% crash. But more importantly, below the trend, we basically saw about a 30% negative move. Meaning if right now from 48 $1,000, we would also have about a 25% or so, 30% move. That would be $35,000 per Bitcoin. That's the absolute lowest price I could ever see Bitcoin going. But even that, I do not see any world in which it happens unless we get a pandemic as heavy as back in 2020, which some people are alleging with the whole monkeypox situation. If it does happen, you know what the thing is though? If you look at the prices and how things reacted back then, if you were just steadily buying, you could have bought XRP at 10 cents, which 1 year later would have been at $2. That's a 20x result in 1 year. With Bitcoin, again, just to put it into perspective, the price went as low as 3,000 and a bit dollars. Whereas, again, about, let's see here. So March 2020, it was $3,000. March 2021, it was $65,000. So again, you could have had a 20x in the span of about a year. If we were to see a massive crash that goes way below our current trend, so another 30% down or so, whoa, you know how crazy that would be? Never in the history of Bitcoin and crypto has it been a bad idea to go crazy on a dip that's below 48,000. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just pretty steady, meaning I've got some altcoins, I've got some Bitcoin, and I'm set for Bitcoin to just break its all-time high and start going, and for these altcoins to flourish. I've sold some of the coins I'm very uncertain about. I'm holding on to some coins that have gone down like 95% because it's not worth selling anymore anyway. I'm mostly just selling some coins that are in the gaming sector, or this, that are not as hot yet, and I'm not certain will pick up. I'm waiting for the spark. And I know that I might be giving up on some gains by doing that, but I prefer the certainty of seeing Bitcoin make the move first. If Bitcoin goes down further from here, there's a possibility. You understand that we can't go down as much anymore, as 48,000 seems like kind of like the lowest we can go in this whole debacle, maybe 47, for example. If we were to go lower, that means we go below the trend, which means it's extremely cheap from any metric. And if you're buying at that point, in my own humble opinion, there's a 99.9% guarantee. Again, this is not financial advice, my thoughts, that you're gonna make a crazy sum of gains over the next year or so. Don't think in your 2-week period. Think 1 year from now. Bull markets last 3 years, bear markets 1 year. We're in a bull market. It started November 2022. All you gotta do is be able to stick through it and maybe go to jail. This sounds crazy. Go to jail for commit. No, if you are forced to hold, all this gets easier because it's hard to look at your money and your gains and losses day to day. But it's so much easier if you think about it from a 12-month perspective. Because right now I believe, guys, that it might take some time. And people keep telling me in the comment section, Dusty, we've been waiting for so long. But I tell you again, it's a matter of time. Be slightly more patient. If we go down and we get a massive crash, either because of the recession, this, that, there's almost nothing that can withhold me from just buying like a freaking maniac. Mostly because every single time it crashed below the trend, it was such a massive recovery. And again, every single time I'm showing you this chart, it doesn't make sense to some people, but it makes sense to me. Bitcoin in a bear market goes down like 80 or so percent, but it recovers with a massive 10x and whatnot in the year or 2 or 3 to come. I guess in this case, it's been like a 25 or so x. It was a 123x the first time I can see right here, a 21x the second time, and right now we're expecting at least a 15x, or I'm gonna say at least a 10x from the $15,000 starting price of the bull market. Bitcoin's price was $15,000 when the bull market started back in November of 2020. Right now, we're expecting at least a 10x. I'm personally saying at least a 15x, but again, that's over a roughly 3-year period. We're about a year and a half in or so, slightly more than that. So slightly more than a year to go. That's my plan. Not going to deviate from it. Right now, mostly Bitcoin and ETH because the ETFs, because it's what the institutions are buying like crazy. Once Bitcoin breaks its all-time high, breaks the cycle, I'm selling almost all the Bitcoin I've got, which might sound crazy, but that's because historically speaking, it's been best. A couple months after, basically get rid of all the Bitcoin, go crazy on altcoins, and then, depending on when it happens, end 2025, you basically, this is hard for people, you have to sell most of your crypto again, either back to Bitcoin or stables, and this is the hardest part, but that's where you lock in those gains. If you turn $1,000 into $1 million, you gotta make sure you actually have the million, or at least $500,000, you don't go right back to 1,000 because it happens to people. And so if a crash were to happen, we just make more gains. And that's the most important key part here. If a crash were to happen, I'm not giving up. Rather than giving up, we're going harder. Keep this in the back of your head. Think about it from a yearly perspective, not a monthly perspective. When it comes to Bitcoin, Again, from here on forward, if it doesn't do a 5x, what? Why wouldn't it? If Ethereum doesn't do a, let's say 3x, but I think like a 6x, 7x could even be possible. If XRP doesn't do a 10x, what are we talking about? Of course it's gonna, but if it crashes, then the multiplier is better because our average price goes down, and because if we crash here, guys, it's gonna be such a juicy opportunity. I really kind of hope so. Might sound crazy, but I do kind of hope so, because we're in one of the peak phases where it's almost bound to pop off like crazy anytime here. If another crazy crash would happen, just like in 2020, that would most likely be the best opportunity of our lives to buy the dip. So I'm not afraid. Actually, matter of fact, I'm very excited about it. Just wanted to make that clear. I've been seeing a lot of questions about what if a recession would hit, yada, yada, yada. For the most part, I think a recession would actually be positive for us, but there was a lot of disagreements on that. A lot of it. I'm reading through comments right now. A lot of disagreeing people. But let's say it were to be bad, a recession,